Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are At the Desk. I'm your host, Gracie Polovich, and in tonight's episode, we will be discussing the current governor's races, the collateral effects of the government shutdown, and taking an in-depth look at the past, present, and future of both propaganda and misinformation. Now, come take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to ATD. First, it's time to send it over to the politics panel to discuss the gubernatorial elections. Over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Gracie. The gubernatorial races in both New Jersey and Virginia are heating up as Jersey Democrat Mike Sherrill leads Republican Citarelli and Virginia Democrat Abigail Spanberger leads Winsome Earl Sears, the Republican. Also, we discussed the recent trend of state redistricting, with Indiana calling a special congressional session to draw up a new map boosting Republicans. Now, Sam, I want to ask you, what do you think these races in New Jersey and Virginia will say about broader voting trends?
I believe these to have actually a very big implication on what we're going to see to come. You have a very big race in New Jersey, as Phil Murphy has led New Jersey for the past couple of elections. And a lot of people are very upset with him. 8 out of 10 voters say they're not happy with the way that this administration is going, including myself, who's a New Jerseyan. So I think that has a lot to say, and including in Virginia, both of these states have been slowly tipping towards a purplish state. So I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely me too. I think that although Democrats right now are a little bit in the lead, it's a very high possibility that Republicans can kind of swoop in, especially with appealing to Latino voters. So it's interesting to see where this will go.
Yeah, so both of these states, they're blue states, but they're trending much more towards purple. Like, for example, in 2020, Joe Biden won the state by New Jersey. He won the state by 16 points. In 2024, Harris only won by 6. Virginia, similar story. It's getting a lot closer there. And plus, Virginia has a Republican governor incumbent right now, and obviously Lieutenant Governor is Winsome Earl Sears. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Right now, Democrats are still the favorites in both elections, but it's definitely looking a lot closer in New Jersey right now.
I mean, Jackson, Spanberger currently has a 12-point lead in Virginia.
Well, 12 point lead according to some polls. I'd say it's closer to 7 or 8 in most of the polls I'm looking at, but I mean, it's going to be like somewhere around there most likely.
As someone who is a Virginia resident, born and raised Virginia, what are you seeing sort of in your home state as far as an attitude towards this race?
Well, I mean, you still have a lot of spite because of, Spanberger was a big, like COVID lockdown person during that time because she was obviously put into the Congress in 2019, and she was in favor of a lot of the Biden shutdown policies that happened in 2021 and on and so forth. So some people still have that spite that got, Glenn Youngkin elected governor back in 2021, but also people are very fed up with the Trump administration. And obviously, Winsome Earl Sears is endorsed by Trump. So it's going to be, some people are going to be upset with that. And that's why they don't want to vote for her. So there's a lot of just, not really supporting either candidate. I think they're both kind of undesirable, but people will vote for one candidate over the other just because they dislike the other one more. That's kind of what I'm seeing here. So it's kind of like the last year's presidential election in that sense. It was just more so about spite for the other party as opposed to an endorsement of their own party.
I mean, the Republican Party in Virginia has been putting out massive attacks on Spanberger, her views on transgender people, things of that sort, typical culture war stuff. I think Democrats are going to win both states, honestly. But the one that's really interesting to me is New Jersey, and I think the Republican candidate, I'm not sure if he'll be able to appeal to enough Democrats and moderates to pull them in away from Sherrill while also appealing to his MAGA pro-Trump base.
Well, I mean, you have to look at the state from a few different things. Like I said, people aren't happy with Governor Phil Murphy. to repeat off of the similar things that happened in Virginia, he was very big in the COVID lockdown. And for schools, he's done a very poor job, actually, with New Jersey declining from the top 5 and continuously misallocating funds to schools, not telling school districts where the funds are going. So on that case, people are kind of looking for a change. Now, Mikey Sherrill's trying to say that she's a different candidate than Phil Murphy, they're both Democrats. But when it comes to it, I think this race is simply to the fact of, do you want something different in Jack Ciattarelli to switch the New Jersey back to a Republican governor state? Or do you want to run the risk of having another Democrat that runs the state a very similar way, with high taxes, with schools not going in the right direction? So it really is, do you want something different, or do you want to try to stay the same course?
I actually think the way that the Republican candidate is running his campaign is very interesting, because although he's still aligning himself with the Trump administration and is very openly in support of them, he is still kind of appealing towards anybody that's still kind of hesitant. I mean, he said that he agreed with Trump that anybody with a history of criminal activity should be deported, but also believes that everybody should have a pathway to recognition or citizenship. Like he's definitely appealing to people that are maybe like on either side of the spectrum. So I think that's definitely putting him in advantage. Also, he is from New Jersey. Like he's very much like a local man. Raised. Right. Like, and the way that he's running his campaign is very much appealing to like the residents of New Jersey, whereas Mikey Sherrill is like a little bit more distant from that kind of community angle.
Well, and to Jackson's point about the numbers, Biden won by 16. And then in the most recent election, Trump lost by only 6 points. In the last governor race, which Jack Ciattarelli did run, this is now his 3rd time running. But in the second time, he only lost by 3, which is a lot closer than most people think. And in the 2024 in Elizabeth, in 2020 in Elizabeth County in New Jersey, Trump received less than 29% of the vote. But in the most recent election in 2024, Trump received 43%, which is almost twice what he did 8 years before. So when you look at that, the numbers are starting to flip towards the Republicans. And it is uncommon for New Jersey. But at the same time, I think they're sick of the Democratic leadership that has been running this state for a very long time.
See, the way I see this, I think a lot of people right now specifically are very unhappy with the Republican Party and how Republicans have been running the government. I know states different. New Jersey has, while a blue state, has had Republican governors before. They're no stranger to this. But I think this could really show midterm wise if Republicans have a chance in the midterms, because I think if at least New Jersey keeps it close, because I don't think Virginia will remain close, I don't think Virginia will remain close. If New Jersey keeps it close in the final polling, we could see kind of like a microcosm what is going to happen in the midterms next year.
Yeah, and so New Jersey's interesting because they've had a recent Republican governor, but that Republican governor was sitting on ABC News on the night of the 2024 election. He is one of the biggest Trump haters out there right now. So I'm wondering if there's a Republican loyalty to Chris Christie at all, or if they're going to be willing to go with a Trump-endorsed candidate. So that's my concern. I do think he has a better shot than Winston Merle Sears at winning the governorship, but I don't know if people are going to be able to go with a Trump-endorsed candidate right now because of how unpopular he is. I know his approval rating is the same as, Obama and Bush in the second term, but it feels right now the American people are very dissatisfied with the Trump administration, but they're also very dissatisfied with Democrats in general. I think people just have a very, very negative opinion of the two-party system right now, and that's why they're turning to more, radical views as opposed to standard Republican and Democrats.
Well, that's why I think Virginia is quite interesting, because with this governor race, they also have an attorney general race, and controversy we could get into if you would like, but when you look at that, and you might have a Republican attorney general and a Democratic governor, which is the first time it's happened since 2005 in that state. And usually Virginia goes opposite of the White House. So like you're saying, with this two-party system, it might look like people aren't necessarily voting for once for their party, possibly, and are going to vote for the person, as it might be a Republican president, a Democratic governor, and then a Republican attorney general. That seems more fun and more American to me.
Well, there's also a major controversy that's going to make it that way. I don't think I think if not for said controversy with Jay Jones, that it may not look that way.
I read that despite the controversy with his messages, there hasn't really been a decrease in support for Spanberger, which I thought was kind of interesting. I think her very somewhat strong stance against Trump has actually helped her, and she's very much deflected a lot of the hate and the speculation regarding the text message scandal. So like I don't know. I think she's running her campaign very strategic, very strong, and I don't think that there's any possibility that she's going to lose the election.
Yes, Bamberger, yeah, she is a very, very good politician. She avoids questions very well. I mean, I hate to say, but that's kind of how politicians have to operate. And Republicans and Democrats do it alike. But I've noticed that she's been doing a better job of that than Winsome Earl Sears, which is the reason why she's leading by a good amount. And yeah, it's because she has experience in a state legislator as well as national legislator. She knows how to get around, interview questions, how to get around debate questions. I noticed that while I watched the debate with her and Winsome Earl Sears. So I do think that she will end up pulling this thing out because obviously we have a week till it happens. And while Republicans have been trending up recently, because I think the Charlie Kirk assassination probably gave them a boost, it kind of radicalized some people to move to the right some. I don't know if it's going to be quite enough to get people to vote in her, but I think that it's going to make it closer for sure. I could see maybe a 3-point win for her or a 4-point win as opposed to a 7-point win.
It's just I have a hard time seeing that they can pull in enough moderate Democrats or people disillusioned with the Democratic Party to actually vote Republican. That's not something I can see happening in either race. But moving on, Indiana lawmakers have recently proposed redistricting plans. They're having a special session in the coming days to talk about it. They currently don't have the votes to do such. But Vita, I want to ask you, this has been happening, a broader trend of redistricting that's starting in Republican states and spreading to Democratic states. Do you think the Democrats are taking the right course of action by also following redistricting plans?
I mean, it's a little bit right now. There is a moral risk, like weakening how their own independent map drawing is a. There is that very strong argument that this is a system for partisan gains, which I think is a very valid argument. But at the same time, I think there's also a big fear in the Democratic Party that this redistricting could give even more power to Republicans. So I don't know. I think it's hard to tell at this point right now. It's hard to tell. What are your guys' thoughts?
Good.
Well, I think that it's kind of expected that, New York, California, more liberal states would respond to what Texas has done, what Indiana has done, because they want, the amount of congressional seats. They want to keep the power that they have. So as long as you don't violate the racial bounds, as long as you keep the districts in the same population, technically the federal courts cannot interfere. That was from the Supreme Court ruling in 2019. So they're going to keep doing what they're doing. I think what's going to end up happening is if both Democratic states and Republican states do the same exact course of actions where they have a state legislator that's Democrat and a Democrat governor, they can get these new lines through. And I think it's going to have a net neutral effect because you're going to have, maybe one more seat added for Democrats in California, one more seat added for Republicans in Texas. At the end of the day, it's going to have a similar result. That being said, I don't agree with Trump trying to get this pushed. I think that he started this. He's the person who started this kind of like battle between Democrats and Republicans as far as redistricting goes. But the end result is not going to be anything crazy, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you that might actually balance out. But when I look at it, I look at this with a lot of political policies, and I see the fact that you set a precedent, and the precedent that this Republican administration is setting is going to lead eventually, when the Democrats can get their things together, that they can technically do the same things because of the precedent set. So I've said this on many issues, but this in particular, and this has been the thing about gerrymandering for so long with drawing district lines, it's that once the party flips, then the other side can do it. So it's quite an interesting thing, but like you're saying, I really do feel like it's going to be very minimal and much less than the Trump and Vance think it's going to be. So I'm interested to see what happens, but I think, again, it's going to have very minimal effect to the grand scheme of politics.
I mean, historically, this was done every 10 years with the census.
Right, with the census.
And now that you have this kind of reactionary wave of going about it, I think it could either backfire terribly for either party, or now that you're suggesting it, they could just end up just going tit for tat. And by the end of this, we're wondering what all the trouble was.
Right. Yes. That's what I think is going to happen. They'll go tit for tat, make some adjustments, and then once Trump leaves office, I think most of the stuff ends. I think he's kind of the root reason why you see these radical, reactionary policies coming into play, because he loves to flaunt his ego. He loves to exert as much power as he can for a second term, and he has the power right now. He has slim majorities in both Senate and Congress, or Senate and the House of Representatives. So he's going to use that to as much ability as he can. And I think that once he leaves office, though, it's going to eventually become normal again. Once you have a president who acts, I guess, as a standard president again, I think it's going to go back to just being, we do it every 10 years according to the census and we readjust.
I just fear, there's been many court cases. You mentioned racial issues with this, and there's been court cases, Baker v. Carr, Reynolds v. Simmons, Shaw v. Reno, and it's all about, most of these are about ostracizing a certain particular group. And what this is doing is ostracizing a group. The Senate, you only have 2 representatives. When it comes to the House of Representatives, it's supposed to represent your district. So if you're drawing state lines that are ostracizing the Democratic Party or ostracizing the Republican Party, that almost seems like potentially it could be brought to the Supreme Court. I know there was a case in 2019, but in that case,
it explicitly said it can't do anything about partisan bias. That's what it said. It has to be a racial or it has to be a lack of population equality. That's
right.
The problem.
But we are, if we keep doing it this way, there is a chance we get down a road where that happens because
of course anything can lead to anything. I'm saying, but as of right now, they're not doing anything that is technically interferable with the federal government.
Right. But when you look at the House of Representatives and why it was put into place so long ago was to represent the people within the district. So this just seems very unconstitutional to me. I know the Supreme Court ruling, it is also Republican leaning, so that's one thing or another. But it just seems wrong when it's supposed to reflect the people. And in these different cases, they ostracize racial groups and they ostracize other types of minority groups. So for me, that looks like this is what's happening just in another minority when it comes to a Democratic population or a Republican population.
Yeah, I mean, lawsuits are alleging that this is a violation of the Voting Rights Act, specifically Section 2. So, this has historically impacted Hispanic and Black voters the most. And I think that if the Trump administration gets their way, history is bound to repeat itself, and we're going to see kind of a mirror of what happened years prior, and that's going to be incredibly harmful, regardless of if this is only going to be within his administration or will be continued after.
I mean, it's already a terribly gerrymandered country.
Right,
we are gerrymandered to death in several areas of the country. I mean, these states get redrawn into oblivion. I think it's worth pointing out that the Supreme Court in the next couple of weeks is going to be looking at the Voters' Rights Act, which will further edit or alter how these lines are drawn up.
Well, my problem with this is I think so far in Trump's administration, there has been things that, he said he was going to do. He's controlled the border. He's done very well with foreign policy. But then when you
That's arguable.
Right, but for the most part, when you look at his wars that he's ended, but when you look at domestically, what has he really done? I feel like at this point we're worrying about the wrong issues and it's just petty issues and we know this is how he is, but let's tackle the economy. Let's tackle inflation and unemployment, things that we said were going to happen and the prices have not gone down. And that is just a fact.
I mean, I think also part of his very, kind of insane push for this is because there is arguments that he ran his campaign on this whole America first, and we haven't really seen that trend. So I think this is kind of a reason why the Trump administration is pushing so heavily for this to take place, especially in Texas.
Yeah, he's pushing this. I really don't think Donald Trump is the same person he was in 2016. He was a much different politician back then. Actually, he wasn't a politician back then. He was a businessman who ran for president and won, but he wasn't bought out yet. I think now he's been a lot more bought out.
Either.
Yes, that's true too. But yes, now he's just, a typical, U.S. politician. Is obviously gave a bunch of money to Argentina. He's not really enforcing the America First agenda. Also, I think he's really, really terrified of these Epstein files, which is why I think some of these theatrics are happening because he wants to distract people as much as possible from, what's in there. Because I mean, and that's a bipartisan issue too. That's something that Democrats and Republicans don't release. It seems to be the one thing they can work on is hiding them. But he seems to be especially terrified of that. And I think that a lot of these, redistricting, all these, hinting about a third term, just things to try to, I guess, rage bait other politicians is just something to distract from the real issues.
A major policy of the Trump campaign, socially at least, it's just information overload.
Right.
Always something new, always a million breaking headlines every day. And some of them seem arbitrary. Some of them seem like they don't matter. Like renaming the Secretary or the Department of Defense, the Department of War, stuff like that. That is designed very obviously to draw up a reaction from people.
Go for America.
From,
That was a classic.
or to distract from what's really going on. You know, with Trump and his administration, you really want to look at what they do, not what they say.
And I look at that, and you're right. The fact that after 2024, the Democrats were dead to rights. There was literally no swag in any Democrat. There was nothing. They literally had nothing. There was nothing going for them.
Unlike your swag.
Unlike this Hamilton swag, happy Halloween, everybody. But when you look at it now, they're giving them things for Democrats to actually run on. They're, you know, before when it was Biden in office, it was kind of just covering up all the wrongdoings, whether he was declining some of the things he wasn't doing right. But now the Republicans are giving Democrats things to run on in 2028 and giving them some momentum if a candidate can take it and run with it.
All right. Well, I think that's very true. I mean, they're giving him pretty much every layup, at least advertising wise, going into 2028. But that's unfortunately all the time we have for today on the politics panel. Join us as we follow the recent redistricting push in the future. Most importantly of all, make sure to go out and vote in your election next week, in your state and local election, as part of a crucial part of making your voice and opinions heard. Back to you, Gracie.
Thanks, Ryan. Now over to Sophia for updates on the ongoing government shutdown, specifically the damage that it has caused.
On October 1st, the federal government officially shut down due to disputes over funding for the Affordable Care Act. 28 days later, it has become the second longest government shutdown in U.S. history, and its impact on American communities continues to grow. There are currently 1.4 million federal employees working without pay, and approximately half of them are furloughed. Many of these employees are middle-class Americans struggling to make ends meet. The lack of consistent paychecks is leading families to take out loans and seek help from food banks. At the end of last week, the Senate failed to advance a GOP bill that would pay federal employees who have continued to work during the shutdown. The American Federation of Government Employees, the largest workers' union in the country, representing 800,000 federal workers, has called on Congress to prioritize the livelihoods of American citizens and bring an end to the shutdown. One of the largest effects of the government shutdown is the suspension of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, more commonly referred to as food stamps. The consequences of this can be widespread. USDA statistics show that 83% of SNAP recipients have a gross monthly income at or below the poverty line. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, food assistance will not be distributed in November to over 40 million Americans if funding is not restored. Another social program in danger of suspension is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, which provides nutrition to approximately 6.7 million Americans. Their funds are quickly depleting, and the organization is calling for an additional $300 million in funding to continue operating for a few more weeks. The Department of Education is also facing disruption, with the 87% of its employees temporarily furloughed. As a result, grant funding activities will be discontinued, as well as civil rights investigations into schools facing complaints of discrimination. Furthermore, air traffic controllers and Transportation Security Administration employees must continue to work since they are considered essential. However, concerns are growing as more employees call out of work and staffing shortages increase. Several flights in Philadelphia, Boston, Dallas, Chicago, and Houston have been delayed due to a shortage of air traffic controllers. Most notably, there were ground delays at the Hollywood Burbank Airport for up to 2.5 hours due to having no traffic controllers for over 4 hours. The shutdown is also influencing hundreds of small businesses nationwide. The Small Business Administration revealed that per day, the shutdown prevents 320 local businesses from accessing $170 million in loans for expansion and hiring. Therefore, at this point in the shutdown, over $2.5 billion in small business loans are currently frozen. However, the shutdown's financial toll on Americans doesn't end there. People who are applying for government-backed home loans could also face delays. Worker furloughs that agencies such as the FHA and USDA can halt loan processing timelines. Experts warn that if there are potentially If the IRS potentially shuts down or scales back its services, other government-sponsored mortgage programs, such as Fannie Mac or Freddie Mae, which support around 70% of the mortgage market, could also be impacted. Without a compromise, the consequences of the shutdown will increase, leaving federal workers and families fearful that there is no end in sight. Back to you, Gracie.
7, 6, 5. Oh.
Thanks, Sophia. Now it's time to send it over to the history panel to discuss misinformation. Over to you, Shay.
Thanks, Gracie. Fake news, we hear about it all the time. And it's existed since the beginning of time. From art to the media and more recently, artificial intelligence, the line between fact and fiction keeps blurring. Now, each panelist has selected a piece of misinformation from 5 periods across time. And together, we will discuss the methods that people used to fight against these tactics in the past, where we see it today, and how we can fight it in the present. So let's turn our lie detectors on and look for some misinformation. All right, guys. So, Tyler, I know you were going to talk about older misinformation, medieval, ancient history. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're talking about today?
Exactly. So I'm going to be talking about the first blood libel, which is basically, it originated in medieval times after a young boy known as William of Norwich was found stabbed to death in the woods. And that basically led to this rumor to spread that Jewish people were getting together and sacrificing Christian children during Passover as part of a ritual and using their blood to make unleavened bread in order to restore the Jews to the Holy Land. This was a completely baseless conspiracy, but the image that I selected will basically depict the first blood libel that basically created this rumor that actually was part of the reason that Jews were were banned or expelled from England for almost 400 years between 1290 and 1657. So it had huge consequences.
Yeah, and do you want to talk a little bit more about how people fought against it back then?
Sure, yeah. So there were different communities that fought back. Some specific examples, Pope Innocent IV actually condemned the blood libel and stated the Jews needed to be protected. He condemned it as being completely baseless. And there were other communities that fought back, that fought the accusations. Certain Jewish scholars would try to prove that there was no reason that Jews could be engaged or involved in blood libels because it conflicted with the Jewish religion.
Yeah, and so I find what you're saying really interesting because I do think we do see a lot of anti-Semitism in the present. And Kara, do you want to talk a little bit more about how we see similar concepts happening in the present where an entire group is being shamed and these baseless conspiracy theories are being formed and the real consequences of these in the present?
Of course. So kind of coming off of that and moving a little bit more into the present, talking about lots of misinformation and propaganda in wartime, specifically with World War I and World War II. Obviously, there was a lot of misinformation around this time, specifically with, World War I. Specifically, there was a lot surrounding the Germans and kind of their tactics, that kind of things that they fed their civilians, obviously, with kind of the way that they were overly villainizing Jews in World War II. And then also there were a lot of different rumors surrounding World War I about the German government burning down dead bodies in a corpse factory, which was actually made by Great Britain and the U.S.
Yeah, but when we're talking about more specifically in the present, how do you think we see examples of entire communities and groups being demonized in the present?
I think kind of a lot of these lies and with this misinformation, like that was exhibited, back in the 1900s, unfortunately, a lot of it is still kind of, like you said, very present today in the present. I feel like oftentimes there is a lot of villainization of a lot of different, groups, especially with everything that's happening recently, with a lot of what's going on currently with stuff dealing with ICE and, different types of types of immigrants, like immigration policy and things like that.
Yeah. And Lauren, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how community groups can kind of fight back against these conspiracy theories that demonize entire communities.
So, talking more in the present day of these conspiracies going on, I think there's a lot of, again, like misinformation, obviously. So it's like about fact checking, and you really have to make sure the sources that you're reading or viewing are credible, because especially now with like AI and different social media platforms, I think a lots of communities are shown in wrong ways or false ways, and it's hard to figure out what's truthful or not now. So I think it's really all about fact checking and finding out what's truly happening.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to Kara. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what examples you were talking about? I know you're talking about World War I and World War II.
Yes. So kind of, I mentioned it like very briefly, but kind of, furthering that discussion, basically obviously there was a lot of propaganda during wartime, but the main source of misinformation was actually what the countries, what their governments were feeding to their citizens. A lot of the time, a lot of these countries were actually lying about their status in the war, about the amount of resources that they had left, about their status in the war, how well they were doing. And kind of, as I mentioned, often lying about their enemies specifically, throughout a lot of it. Part of it, you could argue that it was to kind of, boost morale, be like, let's fight against the bad guys. However, I think it's a really dangerous narrative, especially in, a very fragile, very crucial time, like war. Everyone is struggling. Everyone is fighting against different things. I mean, yes, perhaps there are sides, there are good and bad, but, everyone is obviously fighting through something. Everyone's countries are struggling and things like that. So just kind of really, like the U.S., like I said, really putting down Japan after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and then kind of, everyone kind of turning against, Germany during World War I. I think it still creates a really dangerous narrative, even if you're just trying to show, how bad perhaps your villain really is. These are still people.
Yeah.
These are still lives, and it's still wrong. It's false.
Absolutely. And you're talking a lot about Pearl Harbor and the American government talking to its own people.
Yes.
Nikolai, what do you think about this idea of countries lying to their own people? How do we see that in the present today?
Well, I think when it comes to spreading information, it's all about perception and like how you are affected directly. And I think in the modern day, it's less likely to happen with social media and with you seeing the other side of a story, basically by seeing, you can see all the countries in the world on another platform, except like, the ones where like North Korea, where that's all shut down. That's an example of going back, in World War I, you can't see another side of the story. But when it comes to shedding, like not showing information, I think that's an issue that's kind of been solved a bit. Not really, but with social media, you can kind of see more angles to a specific side.
Absolutely. And Tyler, when we're talking about social media and how people are identifying lies told to them from their own governments, how do you think we can best fight back against this in the present?
So looking at the blood libel example?
Well, just looking at what Kara was saying and talking more about countries lying to their people in the present.
I think, we're very privileged to be living in a country where we have access to so much information across the world. It obviously varies depending on where you live. I do think just staying as informed as you can, looking at different sources is a very basic answer, but I think looking at different sides to any story is probably the best way to stay informed on topics, not just sticking to one news source, regardless of how biased people claim it might be or unbiased it might be. Like, there's always more sides to stories, and even if it isn't directly untrue, like parts of a story or an event can be left out. And I think unless you're looking at different sides and actually putting your foot forward and looking at different sources and trying to educate yourself as best as you can, I don't think you're really going to know what's going on in other parts of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now we're going to move on to my example. I was talking about Cold War propaganda and kind of how that happened. Now, so we're kind of shifting from countries lying to their own people to foreign governments trying to interfere in other countries' affairs. Now, the example that I specifically chose was when the KGB and the Russian government were trying to convince the Russian people and the world in turn that the United States and the U.S. Army's Fort Detrick lab was falsely accused of generating AIDS during the AIDS epidemic. And AIDS was a very real issue. It was a public health crisis, and Russia was not immune to it. And something that's actually interesting about this is that in the mid 1980s, Soviet researchers did seek the assistance of American colleagues, but then that request was denied, with the Americans stipulating that no help would be given until this disinformation ceased. So here it's like, we are going to help you, but we can't help you unless you stop lying. So it's an example of, our government basically trying to fight back against misinformation.
Yeah.
And this graphic, the translation reads, the AIDS virus, a serious disease for which no cure has yet been found, according to some Western scientists, created in the Pentagon labs. So, Kara, I kind of want to talk to you about this. How do you think we see examples of foreign governments, especially when it comes to public health crisis like COVID-19, interfering in other countries?
I think part of the reason why foreign governments kind of maybe cross over and kind of try to spread some lies, spread that misinformation, I think honestly it comes at a lack of accountability. I think it really comes, unfortunately, in some kind of doomsday scenarios where maybe a certain country is trying to cover up for their own maybe actions or their own mistakes. And I feel like kind of, just around in multiple different, government agencies, it's a lot of ping pong. It's a lot of, it's pointing fingers. This is your fault, anything to kind of take the heat off of themselves, because, at the end of the day, these countries, obviously they want to do right by their people, and they want to protect them, and one way to protect them from the truth is obviously to lie.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is the Soviet Union did have a whole encyclopedia kind of filled with misinformation, and they had this term for disinformation. We talk about misinformation and disinformation.
Yes.
Disinformation is very intentional. It is done with the purpose of deceiving.
Absolutely.
Misinformation is more accidental. And Lauren, I want to ask you a little bit more about, so Kara obviously spoke about how it's a lack of accountability from foreign governments when it comes to lying. How do you think we can fight back against lies that foreign governments may try to tell us?
So are you talking about fighting back now in the present day?
Fighting back now in the present, yeah.
So I think fighting back, this is definitely like a big thing now with everything going on. Just basically getting out like the truthful and factual information out there, because again, like social media, Twitter, like Instagram, platforms like that is like now how you're seeing how certain governments and things are like acting upon things. So I think going with truthful things and proof of backing up those things will help us get out what's supposed to be known.
Absolutely. And Lauren, speaking of social media, why don't you talk to us a little bit more about social media, COVID pandemic?
Yes. Okay. So I had social media and memes. So social media obviously got bigger during 2010s, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok. Lots of people use social media to upload information, and that's how a lot of misleading information is spread. But also social media is used to understand complex ideas. So people think they're learning things from social media because they read it on Twitter or something like that. But it's changing the way media literacy is kind of like taken. The example I chose was COVID-19, because during COVID, especially because everyone was home, social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, things like that were used to spread information and give out sources about the pandemic and things that were going on. A lot of the misinformation used was like conspiracy theories. So there was several conspiracy theories that the vaccine was putting a microchip into you from the government, or that masks weren't real. You still could receive like the disease through them, or that COVID even wasn't real. So it was very confusing for viewers at home, and it caused a lot of issues, protests, different things like that. But through the media, they like kind of fought back with it, because scientists and journalists would like fact check and educate people. So it also like was a way of like kind of putting a like kibosh on the misinformation, but it kept spreading, and I still think that it's still spreading now, because no one really knows what's truly going on. What happened. But we all were on social media at that time, especially being home during a pandemic. So I think that has a big thing to do with stuff like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. And it's interesting that you're talking about kind of how we're seeing this right now. And you talk a lot about social media. One of the most big current current trends in social media has been AIs and deep fakes.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to group yours and Nikolai's
Yeah,
together in
yeah.
a way, even though they are very separate.
Yeah.
Nikolai, why don't you tell us a little bit about AI and the role AI plays?
Yeah.
COVID's pretty recent, but AI wasn't as big then, and it is big now. So tell us a little bit about your example.
Of course, AI has been growing exponentially in a very short period of time. I remember 2 years ago, you would make fun of AI images because they look stupid. But now AI has grown to a point where you can't really distinguish if something's real or not. Whenever I watch a video, sometimes I can't. It takes me a couple seconds to realize, is this AI or is this real? An example was in 2024, there are images of the devastation left by Hurricane Helene. There was a certain image of a little girl floating on the river, and that was taken and that was posted online, and there were a bunch of comments raving about it, saying, how could they do this to this poor girl? Spreading all different information about an AI image. So AI, I really think, is the biggest spreader of misinformation that we've seen, because it really changes your perception of what's real and what's not. Because it's getting to a point where you see these videos, you see these images, and you don't know if it's real or not. So I think it's a scary precedent we're setting, and is a big way of spreading information for the future.
Absolutely. And Tyler, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Based off what Lauren said and talking about all these conspiracy theories and how social media just gave so many more people access to misinformation, how do you think AI would have impacted COVID if AI was something that was big back then? Do you think it would have had historical consequences?
I'm sure it would have. Yeah, I think like what Nikolai was saying, you don't really know what's real and what's fake. And I often find myself looking at videos that were posted years ago that I know were not made with AI and the comments are always like, there's always people accusing it of being AI. Like any hard to believe video, I think accusing people of using AI to make these videos is a really, really easy thing for a lot of people to do. And I think if AI had existed, or if AI was what it is today during COVID, I'm sure a lot more people would have been making AI-related accusations about certain reports maybe being AI generated, or certain examples of people like with COVID and maybe their symptoms or whatever being AI generated. I mean, there were so many people denying COVID while it was happening, and I think AI would give them an easy tool and an easy way out of acknowledging like how real COVID is.
Absolutely. And just kind of going back to my example, we've seen how misinformation is a big tool when it comes to public health crises and kind of averting blame, not taking accountability. So if we have tools like AI where we can just basically input information and create something that looks very real as a result of it, well, that could have big consequences for the future. And I want to pivot the conversation. I know we are a history panel, but I do want to kind of look at the implications of AI in the future. So Kara, based off all the examples of misinformation we've kind of talked about, where do you think the future lies with AI? What happens if there's another COVID, if there's another war?
Oh my goodness. I mean, unfortunately, I think one of the dangers with history is that we're kind of destined to repeat it. And the fact that we have, so many different examples of, misinformation and disinformation in some cases already, existing today, and we're up to the year, 2025. I think it has a lot of consequences. I think it has the potential to be very dangerous. I mean, we've already spoken about kind of a lot of the lies and the misinformation that happen through, social media with these AI posts. And I think it's only a matter of time before someone is able to make a really good deep fake about something really serious, and it has a lasting, impact on history. Because what's to say someone makes a really, shockingly realistic video about, say, the US just sent a bomb, over to Ukraine, and then World War III starts. I mean, things like that are very possible. I think especially right now, presently moving forward, obviously things are very shaky right now in the world. And I feel like, unfortunately, I don't think it would take a lot to kind of bring it to that tipping point.
Absolutely. And I do think when it comes to wars in general, AI has a lot of ability to kind of exasperate that conflict in a little way.
Yeah.
And also, like Nikolai was saying, people can just accuse things of being AI. And I think it's this lack of accountability that we're seeing overall.
Yes.
That it's a kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's like AI is very much lying about things to us, but on the other hand, we can also fall back behind AI and be like, that's not real, that's AI. And I do think the line between fact and fiction is getting blurred. It's not like the past where governments were doing most of the censorship. Now it's like we have our own way of lying to the public, and we have our own way of misinformation.
It's gotten out of hand.
It's kind of gotten out of hand. It's more social, it's more accessible.
Yes.
It's not just something that's exclusively controlled by the government.
Yeah.
And that's all the time that we have for today. We hope you found some new ways to look for and fight back against the misinformation and disinformation around you. Back to you, Gracie.
That is the end of tonight's episode. In the meantime, stay updated with ATD on all our socials at PSU at the Desk. And let us know what you want to see us cover next. I'm Gracie Polovich, and we will see you back at the desk next week.